Hey there, welcome to episode 121 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 9:19 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here in the greater Vegas area. I am impressed that I am getting this in the morning. I was going to record it last night, but at least we're doing it in the morning. Today is Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. We normally do publish on Wednesdays, so that's why I'm pointing out, well, we just might make it in the morning. Episode 121 already. Today's title and topic, What a Country. If you're not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, it is essentially personal stories, tales, recollections, my opinions and views on things, mostly with history built in. So I'm not going to do a movie review, but I might talk about going to movies since I was... since I saw Star Wars when it came out in 1977, it came out in May, but I think I probably saw it closer to my birthday in June. So, some history of movies. Could be anything. Probably not going to have a lot of guests on. Probably no reason to. The term quaggling sand is one I coined when I was very young, probably like 4. I don't know if anybody has the actual date. It's something that refers to what you probably call pins and needles, quaggling sand. It's that swirling mental feeling as you're recalling days gone by. Also, hopefully my head is not numb. On that note, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary of one sentence that I will read to you. The links for the program are, as usual, homepage, profile page, linking everything. So let's get started so we can get this published, one of those, today in the morning. The summary of today's episode, I find I am shaking my head more and more lately. Maybe a little look back at some of the milestones I have been around for, or my recollections, would be a good thing. So yeah, fair warning, the news of the day is essentially driving this. What a crazy time. Oh, the Quaggling Sand homepage, Quaggling Sand, QUOGGLINGSAND, just like it sounds, quagglingsand.com. I don't know if it'll ever look nice, to be honest, but I just renewed the certificate, so we're good for another 3 months of no warnings about being an unverified site. Profile page linking everything since March of 2021, so 5 years of buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You do not need to spend any money, but there you will find links to all of my audio and other media adventures, including where else to find them, YouTube links, and so on. Don't forget to buy me an update. Audio program is published at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts first before it goes to Spotify for republication to the usual places. And again, you don't have to spend any money at all, but there are affiliate links with my favorite coffees and other things that I actually use. If you'd like to support the efforts, anything that comes in through buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo is indeed put towards coffee or coffee accessories. It is what powers all these efforts. And on that note, what a crazy time. We find ourselves in the midst of chaos, according to some. Maybe others are fine with all of it, or some of it, or who can say, really? I am not a fan. But on the other hand, I am something of a pragmatist in that if the norms and overall systems that we have all grown familiar with, whether we like them or not, were so close to being dismantled or disabled or otherwise broken, well, things were not as they may have seemed for quite a while now. In other words, if it took a year-ish, and that's an oversimplification, but if it took a year to break everything this much, it wasn't on solid ground. And we know that that is the case, or was the case. So yeah, I guess better to know now. It was going to happen eventually. I've commented on this in a previous episode, the notion of going back to the before times, whenever those were. But any rational person knows that the damage has been done, or maybe things have been improved. It's hard to say what you think. These are all matters of opinion for now. In the near term, there will be some sort of a reckoning, one would think, that the various jarring changes we have all been watching in the news or feeling for ourselves and discussed in various ways from various perspectives on our favorite content creator outlets will become more apparent in economies, interactions, immigration, tourism, and who knows what else in the long term. In Vegas here, we are definitely noticing a reduction in visitors, especially from Canada. It has been about a year, or maybe it has been 20 years. And that's serious. This may have been a long time coming. Certainly people have been talking about this for a while. Not the specific version, but decline. And then the big thing that will probably not and really should not go away, with a label that doesn't even sound like a serious thing anymore, the so-called Epstein files, which seem to represent a couple of decades of corruption and far worse with what appears to be an ongoing and perhaps worsening cover-up over the last few months in particular. Sorry, I had to pause there and get some water. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The cover-up is always worse than the crime. For the last few months in particular, although it may be actually the cover-up over the last few years. Worse than the billions of dollars of measurable and visible corruption, of course. It's only money. To be sure. But all of it taken together is well beyond any of the usual disappointment people express about our government. This is quite the other thing. We are in uncharted territory of corruption and constitutional crisis and whatnot. And actually, I have to say, the thing I find either the most humorous or the most disheartening is the always optimistic, we're heading towards, we're starting to look a lot like, and I just want to reach through the whatever medium it is and say, do you actually pay attention, or maybe you wrote this a year ago? Like, I think we're here. We are we have reached the problem. We're not approaching it. Way back, I was just 5 years old when we went to see fireworks for the big July 4th, 1976. July 4th, 1976. It would be only a year before Star Wars came out. Famously, the big bicentennial celebration. This was a word I heard a lot of, bicentennial this, bicentennial that. I remember it being a big deal, and this was back when there were newspapers and conversation on television shows. Not to mention discussion in the classroom. Granted, I was in kindergarten, but still I remember coming up, the good old Mrs. Urban was on it. She did not like that I knew how to read, but that's a different story. The recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance in the classroom was a thing. I honestly don't know if it still is, I assume. I honestly don't remember it specifically in that class in kindergarten, but I just had one teacher, Mrs. Urban. But in those early years, it was just one of those things we did. I definitely remember it more clearly as the years went by, and I do not recall any time where the pledge was not a chore of sorts. Without too much meaning attached to it, it was just a thing we had to do in the morning. Now, I am not necessarily a fan of the morning recitation to remind young people that they owe allegiance to a flag, because there's too much nuance for our modern youth. And it was back then, too. You could say that at any time. Not to mention adults. It probably was back then. So, anytime. Merely reciting the pledge becomes rote. And once it becomes rote, it becomes meaningless, in my opinion. And I'll have something to say about that again later. My memory of all of this happens to begin at the bicentennial, which is, I guess, fortuitous, perhaps, or it's something, which is maybe a useful starting point to look at the year-over-year evolution of the school experience with what I would call lackluster history, curriculum in general, and certainly a profound weakness when it comes to teaching civics and in general connecting these. So we grow up with some understanding of how we got here and why, not to mention our role as individuals in all of this, or at least what we might want it to be. And even that is a question. I think if you were to ask, person on the street, what do you think? What would you like to see if there was a version 2.0 or whatever, however that would be phrased? I don't even know what people would come up with. I don't know if people really think about this stuff anymore. Teachers as usual are important and yet not always considered such. History and civics as specific subjects were not strong in my academic career. I don't know if they are in general. There's one bright spot, which I have mentioned previously, in the 8th grade, wherein we had Vic Columbi teaching civics with his prosthetic legs and missing fingers from his time in Vietnam. He spoke somewhat opening fix that. He spoke somewhat openly about these things. Like he didn't shy away. So he called his fingers his stubbies. And he was perfectly happy to speak about his times and experiences and so on, to the extent one might want to with a classroom full of snot-nosed 8th grade kids. Not only did he integrate some of his own lived experiences into the story of civics, what it is and why and so on, but he connected the current youth culture, which at the time was a collection of archetypes like punks and their gelled hair and clodhopper shoes. I don't know if that would be considered a punk, but that's what they called themselves. Stoners with their feathered hair, shoe scuffs, and bloodshot eyes as they lumbered around. The shoe scuffing thing, I'm glad that's not still popular. Not to mention other archetypes. Recall the Breakfast Club for some ideas. He made civics lessons about how people interact with a system from different perspectives, not to mention with each other, by bringing it into campus and neighborhood interactions. So pretty interesting. It made it accessible for the 13-year-olds. There were 3 teachers I recall in high school: Mr. Houlihan, I think he pronounced it Houlihan, Mr. Mounts with a Z, Mr. Mounts, and Mr. Kersey. I'm shaking my head as I ponder that window of lost opportunity, with Houlihan teaching exactly to a basic skills test around history, such that his students would know the questions and answers without any deviation when it came to test time. And that was true. We just literally took the test all the time. That is all he was teaching. The test. No nuance, no subtlety, no interconnectedness, no impact on nothing. Test. Mounts was a basketball fan, and at one point he used a class period to have us watch a Michael Jordan documentary. He was mostly screwing around in the classroom, not a real teacher by any objective measure. Then there was Mr. Kersey. He was a serious person, but who was also going to be moving on to eventually become a principal. The principal role at Apollo High School, the school closer to my home than was, and I guess still is, in Glendale, Sunny Slope High School, where I was attending. We were mostly left with 2 student teachers in Mr. Kersey's class, one of whom was given the boot, and maybe more trouble, for partying with students at least once after a football game. Yep, quality education. I don't know if he was like barred from ever teaching again. That seems like a career-limiting move. Generally speaking, history is a weakness in the standard curriculum as far as I'm concerned, for 2 reasons, in my opinion. First, students have no life experience with no nuance. Thus, history is a story without specific relevance. In learning state history, so Arizona history in my case, we learned the names of the counties, a smattering of historical bits through the history of statehood, with some consideration before a state became a state, when it was a territory and all this. And of course, a timeline review after. Here's what happened this time, and here's when that happened, and so on. The history of New Jersey would probably have been more interesting had I stayed there, but would have captured anything. But would we have captured anything of value without a deeper awareness? I don't really think so. I'm not really sure. But what do you know through K through 8, right? And then in high school, that's not the best time to learn about this stuff. You want to get your driver's license and go to the prom and all that stuff. It's a different phase. Second, history is overly political, especially now. Lately, lately more so. But in general, as the saying goes, history is written by the winners, and without real critical thinking skills that come from life experience and something of a mature look at what is happening at some contemporaneous point, and where the status quo may have originated. Like, how did we get here? The cause and effect connections and a bigger picture concept, and perhaps comprehension. So conception, I suppose. Conception, which is what I wrote. Conception, perhaps comprehension of what we could title How the World Works and Why. Up through age 13, none of that really connects, which is what I found in my travels. The patriotic angle. I always had a fascination with flying, which I've talked about previously. And one of my first life plans was to join the Air Force, learn to fly, and fly a lot, if possible, then become a commercial pilot and fly off to the sunset. Or towards it. Maybe a little bit simplistic, but that was before high school, so I was There was no nuance. And what did I know other than comparisons between stoners and punks by the time I was 13? The AFJ ROTC program at Sunny Slope fit my general plan and made my variance easier so that I could attend Sunny Slope rather than Apollo, which is a story I have shared previously as well. This was a net positive for a variety of reasons, but maybe not for my flight plans and for the notion of patriotism. I was all in on the usual patriotism of entering the AFJ ROTC program when I was in high school and then eventually moving on to the ROTC program in college for a little while. And some of the educational curriculum did include some history from the perspective of air power, defense programs, the mechanics of flight, and more. It was pretty interesting, actually. Not to mention the leadership components. I participated in the competition drill team, color guard, and various extra programs like visiting the MCRD, that's the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. In San Diego, if you saw Full Metal Jacket, it kind of looked like that. None of the Marine training action, though. And with a Naval J ROTC unit, that's where we went to the MCRD. And of course, a week at Luke Air Force Base for a similar type of program, but very different setting, plus air shows and whatnot. I was generally involved. Our instructors tended to bicker a bit between themselves. They were older gentlemen and had some severe leanings to the right, but for the most part, it was a positive in my high school education. Yay. That said, it was easy to come away from this with some cynicism. First of all, I was the designated pledge leader in the mornings for a year. I was the squadron commander, after all, which meant every morning I would go to the front office, flip on the campus PA, public address system, and lead the school in the Pledge of Allegiance. I tried to inject some energy, being the first thing we would all do in unison at 8 a.m. sharp with Miss Lutz. You can imagine what she looked like. You'd probably be right. With Miss Lutz one time asking me why I was so spastic. Why can't I just say the pledge? That was her word, spastic. In leading this, the pledge was typed out on a piece of wood, sort of like a license plate for the bathroom key. So it was always handy for those of us saying the pledge in the morning. And I think it was twice that I had to glance at it while reciting the pledge because it had become a rote missive without meaning in any way while I was saying it. So it was easy if I lost my train of thought for a moment, I would have to identify like, oh, where am I in the pledge? You know, when a word stops sounding like a word, something we had to do because we had to do it. And so even though I was saying it every morning, it just became a rote presentation. Flip on the switch, start talking. The big thing was that the band would practice as far away from the campus as possible so that they could play full volume and so on. So they were on a practice field far away. And they said they would stop playing because they could hear me over their playing. So mission accomplished. But yeah, the pledge is just a thing. It's a thing you have to say. So it's unfortunate, but I think it is true. I mean, requiring young people to say something doesn't drum it into them, doesn't make it more believable and so on, especially if you look around and you see that that's not always the case in their adults around them and so on. So, I don't know if it's a misplaced effort. And then it became career path over awareness. Unless you're a history major or pursuing something related to government specifically, higher education is generally steering toward career goals. At Harvey Mudd, pretty nerdy school, only 1/3 of our course load was in humanities, and those had core requirements like psychology and philosophy and whatnot. And as I focus on economics to go with my engineering pursuits, history was really not a thing we pondered in great detail. Now, as it happens, I was in college when the U.S. invaded Iraq, when Desert Shield became Desert Storm with regard to Iraq invading Kuwait. So this was what is commonly referred to as, or who is common as Bush 41, Herbert Walker Bush, not so Bush 43. So it's generally labeled the Gulf War. Was it all about the oil? Probably. Was there going to be a draft? No, although that was a huge concern. Was it a good idea? Well, one of the subtle elements that gets mentioned now and then was the U.S. advance coming to an end. Let me fix that. Coming to an end and leaving Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq. So much was said at the time about how there could have been a full-on invasion and toppling of power and regime change and all this. Was this the right decision? Maybe. And this is the sort of thing that gets kind of swept aside, is leaving the person in power and how it impacted stability of the region and so on. So it was a deliberate decision. Every once in a while, you have to remember that George Herbert Walker Bush was the director of the CIA, I think, at some point. He was in the CIA. And once you're in the CIA, well, that's a different thing. But I think he was the director, right? Anyway, so he probably had a little bit more insight about the workings of governments and regions and stability and so on. Maybe not. And people talk about it every once in a while, and especially now, once again, regime change. Was it the right decision? Maybe, but it was deliberate. It was a deliberate decision to not proceed and roll across Iraq and whatnot. How would this impact the future? We would find out, or we would be told, perhaps. Right in there, the Oliver Stone movie came out. So I think that was in 1981. The invasion was, I think, right before. It was a reawakening of distrust in government and dissemination of news. Recall that prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, there was general trust in the U.S. government. And then after that, the conspiracy theories and the general sense that the government was lying to us became a thing. I was still in college, so none of this was a focus at the time. And on moving to Silicon Valley in 1993, my own attention was on my new career plans and the chaos of crazy tech development and Silicon Valley time and internet time and all this stuff that's just moving super fast. My need for corrective lenses and my disillusionment with the AFROTC program once in college sent me in a new direction. I was no longer going to be an Air Force pilot, and I didn't want to have to deal with the complete disconnection between the AFROTC program, which took place at USC at the time. Harvey Mudd did not have its own installation, and I didn't have a car. So it took place at USC, totally disconnected from my Harvey Mudd day-to-day. And it just wasn't a program that matched what I was hoping it would be. So I moved off in a different direction, and ultimately a better one in hindsight. But who can say, really? Now, looking back, Silicon Valley was going to be a part of this collection of problems, which we are beginning to feel at scale now. So it's kind of ironic, perhaps, or maybe tragic. Now we have social media, certainly division, a lot of ignorance. Ignorance is just not knowing things. It's not a judgment. It's just a state of affairs. Any objective look at almost anything must include the realization that the upsides to more communication between more parts of the planet more often can be misused. Has been misused, in fact. My take, without good information, people will accept information that aligns with their own beliefs, aka confirmation bias, aka also known as motivated reasoning, all the biases you might have read about. Hopefully you read about them. You are living at the end of a fire hose called Twitter or TikTok or whatever. You get pelted with opinion and agenda all the time. I have come to despise and avoid these platforms, but there is a lot out there and a lot of people consume this stuff daily. I think the most troubling thing, the people elected to operate this government are not always knowledgeable. They give into propaganda or party agenda or probably a ton of financial influence. And by probably, I mean definitely. So they're not necessarily, the whole basis of our elected government is that anyone should be able to be a part of it, represent their populations, or just take part in general. So there's no test. There's no basic skills test. If you want to be a government employee, you probably need to take a basic skills test. If you join the military, it's the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, of course. I don't know if I'll ever forget that one, and other testing and so on. But to be an elected official in our government, you just have to get elected, which is crazy. Anytime any elected official uses the term co-equal branches, it becomes clear that they aren't merely parroting that expression, or they really are unaware of the fundamental design of the republic. The reason Article 1 appears first, defining the Congress. So if you only view the government as three co-equal branches and checks and balances, of course, then you're missing the point, which was we don't want to have a monarchical government. We certainly don't want to have dictators and kings, but we don't want to have all power resting in one person or one small group of people. So we want most of the power to be represented in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. The Great Compromise is what it is. The Senate is kind of a questionable implementation, just like the Electoral College. But the point is, the power was supposed to be rested with the people through their elected representatives. And then the president does what they tell the president to do. It's not supposed to be the other way around. And that is by design. Article 2 is the presidency, the executive branch. It's not supposed to be, Article 2 is second because we really want the executive to be in charge of everything. That was never the intent. So they're not really supposed to be co-equal. It's much more your board of directors deciding where the company is going, and then they tell the president or the CEO or whatever, here's what you do. Here's what we want to accomplish. Now it's up to you to do the day-to-day. And it has become, you know what? I'm going to do what I want, and too bad. I think that's a problem. When we don't know, we are susceptible to any inputs that sound right. That makes these are the things that make us feel right? Oh yes, I like the way that sounds. I'm gonna agree with that. The things that confirm the things that we want to be true to solve our own problems, no matter how catastrophic the actual actions might be. It's like moving I need this wooden plug here to solve my problem. And so you pull it out of the side of the lifeboat and the boat starts filling up with water and you're like, but I got what I need. Do people understand outcomes? You get what you need for the moment, but you're in the same lifeboat. Do people understand outcomes and impacts, or is there a desire to double down to feel correct and then to reinforce those impressions out on the internets? So in other words, nobody wants to be wrong. So they just continue with, no, I'm glad I voted this way, or this is the right decision. That's what I wanted. That's why Sadly, we know, which only makes for easy division. We know when people are wrong, right? You can look objectively at a situation and say, you know what, this is not right. Having watched this all unfold in earnest since being in college, since focusing so much of my career on tech, but also maintaining continued interest in filling in my own awareness of history. That's sort of a self-study, I suppose, independent study. A lot of head shaking on my part. I'm always more amazed at how much people are split and influenced and made less aware because of all this technology that's been unleashed. Now, I will say I never worked on social media platforms directly. I never worked at Twitter. I never worked at Facebook. I see a lot of people that went to my college are working at these kinds of places. And it's kind of unfortunate, I think, but it is what it is. I did work at Netscape, so we enabled people to have access to the internets in a more friendly way, I suppose, and maybe that's part of the problem. Certainly, I worked at Netscape when Mark Andreessen was there, before Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z, as you may know it. That's a different thing. But I worked at salon.com, so I worked in media. I've certainly been a publisher of local media before, local kind of news style media. So I think that those weren't the problem. Publishing a local, Radio Sunnyvale in Sunnyvale, California was not causing trouble as far as I'm aware. But the bottom line is there's a way to become more involved proactively, but there's also a way to just become a consumer from that fire hose. And I think it's too easy to, if that fire hose is filled with Kool-Aid, which you may believe was the thing in Jonestown, but as we probably know, if you check your history, it was Flavor Aid. Still a lot of head shaking on my part. So up ahead, what's going to unfold? Who knows? Who knows really? The George Santayana quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," from his book, The Life of Reason, The Phases of Human Progress, Volume 1. That quote comes up now and then. And by the way, it is more useful taken out of context as it always is. It's never presented in the context in which it is written, it really needs a corollary. The people who do not understand the past will be swayed by those who do. For better or worse, that would be a minority, and thus the minority of the population. And thus the influencer terrain is so valuable for swaying large swaths of the overall population, because those offering confirmation bias and the dopamine and adrenaline rushes daily will accept a good narrative for their audience to feast upon and to monetize. And here we are. Do I sound cynical? Yes. Going from the 200th birthday and approaching the 250th, I myself was not a part of the social networking and social media universe in my travels, other than a consumer. I was always closer to the hardware, but still technology is a part of the problem. And in fact, being closer to the hardware just means all the mobile devices. Yes, I worked at Palm. I worked at Apple. Palm on cell phones specifically. Worked at Apple. Worked at Philips and all these other companies. So I was always close to the hardware, but that's how you have a pocket spying device now, right? Those developments along the way. So technology is definitely a part of the problem. It could be a part of a solution, I think. Can people gain access to good and accurate information? Sure. How is that managed? That is a great question. Who is correct? Who defines what correct is? Well, the winner writes the history, but is that always a good thing? Will people even believe it at this point? That might be a tough sell. There is absolutely room for innovation, I think, for the application of technology to drawing the picture, illustrating the connections, codifying the cause and effect, ideally motivating curiosity and questions, maybe even learned discussion. If you don't remember Homer Simpson telling the young, I cannot remember, I think the young boy from, was he from Mexico? So he said learned, and he said, learned, maybe even learned discussion, constructing, or a constructive debate would be nice. Constructing a constructive debate. How about that? Last point. The big 250 is coming up, reflecting on 50 years since that first big celebration. Well, the one that I remember and was sort of a part of. And everything that has changed, everything that has gone down a very dark and disappointing path, in my opinion. It's not a great thing. Optimistic? Maybe. I honestly don't know what the countless hours of optimism and pessimism appearing on your recommended or for you pages or feeds or whatever. What are they telling you? What do you think? Do any of these people know anything more than monetization at this point? I don't know. I tend to think that the time is coming for something new, or at least a really hard look at bringing some base ideas, which were good ones and had been based on a lot of historical reflection and philosophical consideration. That is a lot of reading I would recommend people pursue. Like, where did the ideas for the government that they designed nearly 250 years ago, well, from now, 250 years ago, where did those ideas come from? They came from history and lived experience. Into the 21st century we go to make the Republic more responsive, more transparent, and better educated, if we can keep it. And if you don't know what that's a reference to, then you got to get back to reading. Mostly, day to day, I think most people are not affected by big, giant swings at the federal level. So the current state of affairs doesn't really impact people so much, but it does impact people a lot when it does. Various things that are impacting farming and food supply, fuel supply, oil. Oil is always the lifeblood, unfortunately. Clearly immigration. We are a nation of immigrants. So the pendulum swinging so quickly back and forth between, immigration is good, immigration is bad, immigrants are good, immigrants are evil, criminals, and all this other silliness. I will say, once you travel outside of the country, or once you work with people from other places, Silicon Valley was like a central hub is an overused word, but certainly Silicon Valley was powered a lot by immigrants and immigrant talent. And yeah, so you would work daily with people who were from faraway places who spoke English as a second language, which I always appreciated because they were speaking a new language to work with us, so to speak, while I didn't learn their language. So it's an interesting time. I think lived experience plays a tremendous role, which is why I think teaching history before you have any is kind of a mess. You have no way to connect what got us here to what you are today and what is going on around you. So I think the learning of history is a lengthy process. And I think you have to be interested in it. Otherwise, you imagine that, and it can be used effectively that, this is the country that matters more than any others, and so on. If you think about where we are today, it is indeed, as Sir Isaac Newton would say, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. If I have seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. And if you don't know that reference, you have some more reading to do. So if you don't understand that, and if you don't have the origin story of how we got here, then you will probably listen to YouTube or some goofy podcaster telling you things. And that's where I will leave it. But yeah, totally crazy. Totally crazy. I don't know what's going to come of it. We'll see. We're going to find out whether we like it or not. Thanks for listening as always. And that's all I got today. Good luck.